Okay, we are live streaming. Awesome.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, Dr. Mitnaul. What a week. We had the pleasure of being featured in Yahoo, you and I, on this topic, this very topic about cyberbullying. So this is clearly weighing on parents' hearts and minds. So thank you so much for being here.
For me, I have enjoyed our kind of virtual collaborations too, and getting the word out and really helping parents, I think, to feel more confident about, maybe understanding this topic a little bit more and hopefully helping them to bring some, peace to their child who may be struggling, on either side. So,
Absolutely. Now, there are a lot of people talking on social media right now, a lot of whom are experts and a lot of whom just think they are. So before we get into what we're talking about today, I would love for you to tell everybody just why we're talking to you, why you are the expert. Who are you? What do you do?
So I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, meaning that, I went to medical school and received all my specialty kind of boards training in working with this population of kids. And that's what I do in my day-to-day life. So I actually see families and kids, typically from the age of 5 to 18, talking about a range of concerns from anxiety to depression to trauma to ADHD. And so, as you might imagine, I also see a lot of what we call neurotypical kids who are just struggling, and it might be hard for families, for schools to kind of untangle. Okay, what of this is related to kind of social concerns going on in their life, and what's mental illness, or are there two things kind of going on together? So I did my training in San Antonio, where I went to medical school, did some graduate school at Georgetown, and then did my residency and fellowship at Dartmouth. And now I'm here in Kansas. So my Monday through Friday is just, seeing kids and trying to help their families. I'm also a dad, which doesn't make me an expert, but it certainly, as you know, being a parent gives you some skin in the game about, taking this seriously, not just because I want my clients to be better, but also, I'm protective of my kids, right? And want them to inhabit a world that, that they can find great friendships and great relationships without, the threat of something, happening to them or making them feel anxious about where they are and who they are.
Thank you so much for what you do. I know that there is a great need and there is a great lack of access to quality mental health care providers and services across the globe, across the nation. So I'm sure you are very busy. And with that, we will get into it. Today we're talking about cyberbullying, which is actually just bullying now. The difference between a child's digital life and a child's real life is so convoluted that there is little separation there. So, Dr. Mitnaul, I would love to know what you're hearing from children. What are they sharing with you? How are they wrapping their brains around and processing this onslaught, whether it's in real life or digitally?
That's a really great question. And part of it is, it's because it is so, as you've talked about, interwoven, the real life and the virtual life, that often actually they have difficulty distinguishing between the two. So what I get to hear is, here's what the struggle is, or this is what my experience is through school. And so I'll give you an example. So I might in a day, hear a child say, I'm really going to school, and their parents might say they're really avoidant, and I'm not sure why that is or what the struggle is, because typically they've done all right. They've typically had really great friends and supports there. They've enjoyed sports, school, extracurricular activities. And so sometimes the kernel of the story ends up being, I got in a dispute or argument or a confrontation with someone, or someone just doesn't like me. And then rather than, us address it, one-on-one and kind of practice our social skills and how to resolve conflict, instead, they chose essentially kind of a nuclear option where, they've taken their picture and maybe converted it into a meme, or they've taken some video and kind of, chopped it into a small GIF. And then rather than even just, sharing it on text, maybe they've posted it to their social media profiles. And so what this means is, not only is this being, shared just to their face, but actually publicly. And so now they're walking the halls with, concern about, guilt, shame, and because of the things that other people have posted without them being able to give a rebuttal or so that's unfortunately what the state of, just as you said, I mean, that's just what bullying looks like now. It's not cyberbullying, and that can cause a lot of anxiety, depressive symptoms too, and trauma actually in the lives of kids. And so it's why it's such a big deal.
What advice do you have for parents? And does it differ between if their child is the bully or the bullied?
There are some parallels. I mean, the first is a conversation at home, right? Now, the context of that conversation will be a little bit different depending on what side they're on. So I think one of the things that I'm often encouraging families to emphasize if their child is being bullied, one, is that, in the home is the safe place to be able to talk about anything that's going on in your life, right? So the good, the bad, and the ugly, we are here and are on your team. So I almost want parents kind of sitting side by side with their child, talking about, you can tell me anything that's going on. And our goal is to love you well and to help you to navigate the situation. And that part is shared even in terms of having a conversation with the child who is a bully. That I need to know about behaviors you're engaging in. Again, not because I just want to punish, but I really need to understand what's going wrong here and why our behaviors are causing other people harm. The next steps are often where the branches kind of differ. So for the child who's being bullied, it's going to be really important that there are conversations with the schools, and we can talk about the reasons for doing that, but making sure that our kids have a community of support, and that teachers and other adults around are aware of what's going on. Because often, if the bullying is happening in real life, then often that's in the cracks where adults aren't looking. And again, online is an easy place for that to happen because unless they have bark, unless the parents have been, intentional, those are also some hidden spaces where often parents aren't as vigilant or aware of what might be going on. So those are kind of the first ways: a conversation within the home, making sure that the school and administrators are aware too, and then also just the ongoing conversation of checking in with how our kids are doing emotionally, so that if there's more to do, then we can do that. On the bullying side, it is conversation within the home, also talking to the school and not being afraid of the school registering that they probably will have some policies to best address that. And then in the case of the child as a bully, I'm often, right away, for the child who's being bullied, there might be some, growth and remediation. Acting out as a bully, that's already letting us know there are some needs that need to be attended to. And so that's a family who should be, really talking to their pediatrician, talking to a mental health provider, maybe a child and adolescent psychiatrist as well, to help the family formulate a way to help this child be successful.
So thank you. That was a lot packed in, very concise and helpful. I want to reiterate a few things. One is that, good kids are going to make bad choices. And so your goal as a parent is to not freak out, to your point about being a safe place. If your child is being bullied, you don't need to go into like beast mode and, like, who was this kid, because you want to protect them, but they will be more open with you if you stay calm and they don't have to worry about you embarrassing them further. Same thing if your child is the bully. Again, it hurts. It hurts if we hear that our children are being unkind or just not like we want them to be. But again, they're kids. Good kids are going to make bad choices. You stay calm as the parent and reach out to your pediatrician, reach out to a child mental health care provider, psychiatrist, psychologist, etc. There are resources, and our team will be sure to link to those below: blog post, that Yahoo article that Dr. Mitnaul and I were able to contribute to this week. A lot of great help for you there. I want to ask you now about a phrase that two phrases actually, phrases that I have heard. One is that hurt people, and that anxiety attracts anxiety. So if you have a really anxious kid, they might be even more of a target for a bully, because the bully can almost smell that and then attack. So wherever you want to take the conversation now, I've just kind of thrown that in your lap.
That is true. That I do find that there's a higher propensity of my kiddos who might struggle with a little bit of social anxiety to be vulnerable. And part of that is because, what separates bullying from just, a misunderstanding and an argument that just, boils over and goes a little bit too far, is that often there's kind of a power gradient, right? And so whether that's, perceived cool kids versus, nerds, or in the digital landscape, that might be someone with 10,000 followers versus just 100 followers, right? So that power gradient is often what allows the perpetual cycle of kind of pushing someone around, and again, whether that be physical or emotionally too. And so if parents know that and kind of recognize that in their children, that oh, my child is maybe a little bit more anxious and perhaps more prone to be picked on, that will also help them come up with creative strategies to help their child kind of navigate the world, right? And so one of those might be traveling a bit more in packs between classes, finding their like-minded friends to help kind of shore up that feeling of not being the one exposed or likely to be picked on. And likewise, that's also the importance of making sure that the spaces online too that our kids inhabit, that they also aren't kind of vulnerable or prey. So in the first phrase, hurt people, it is not uncommon, and that in my clinic I might see the bully, and that what I'm uncovering, below the surface, that I almost wish, all the kids who've experienced bullying could hear, is that, often there is loss, or there is, trauma, or there is separation, or there is significant transition, going on in the life of the child who might be engaging in some of the bullying behavior. So getting at that is part of the way that we think about how we help the child to present better, to do better in the world. And of course, that's not everyone, and there can be exceptions to the situation. But those are really helpful things to think about, and it's part of what's in my mind and what I'm encouraging parents to think about as well. That okay, this child who's acting out, there are some pains underneath, or there's something going on there that we need to better understand to prevent this from happening again.
For the child who is really struggling right now with being bullied, it's really negatively affecting their mental health. They might not have a pack of friends to go between classes with. They might not have the most supportive home environment. What I would say to them is that please stay strong. It will get better. It does get better. I promise it gets better. You are not alone, and you are beautiful and loved, and just try to build their confidence as much as possible. What would you add to that?
I think those are really the cornerstones. I mean, the only thing I might add to it is, I want them getting it from as many different sources as possible. And so I tend to use movies and books as a way of communicating story to kids to try to lock it in. And so I really like in the movie Inside Out, Riley, when she's going through a tough time and the emotions are kind of swirling around her brain, at part of the core of her identity is these connections to these wonderful islands. So there's like family attachment, and there's, fun and social and friends. And then there's like athletic things too. And so often part of the road in helping some of these kids who maybe are struggling with having that supported that village is, if you're an adult of influence in the life of that child, trying to look for ways to encourage those other structures of support, so that when they're really going through a tough time, that maybe they are building those extra islands of support. So, maybe you do notice that, okay, maybe you're not interested in basketball or football, but you really have a great vocabulary and a way of expressing yourself, and perhaps, debate, or maybe there's a way to use that gift that plugs you into other kids who kind of share that same ability. And so I think too, those are ways that our kids experience that affirmation that you're describing. When your friend gives you a high five because you helped score the extra point that won the quiz bowl, that too is the equivalent of a hug from a cousin, or a pat on the back from a friend. And so if we can kind of keep that cycle going and think about, all right, if these things are missing, are there other supplemental ways to kind of get in there and help kids to not only hear it, but also feel you are loved, you are valued, your life is worthy and worthy of dignity and protecting. And, those are also the ways that our kids hear that.
Wonderful. Yes. Build their confidence, shower them with love, give them those islands of support. In terms of communicating to the bully, just how harmful their words and actions can be. What have you found that works for just getting through to them? I know a lot of parents are like, can we have more empathy training in schools? And it's like, schools are burdened. Schools are overwhelmed. That'd be great.
They are. Right.
How do we help the bully understand, like, gosh, this is not good. This is not good for them. It's not good for you.
And part of that answer, and part of what makes it nuanced, is it depends on where the deficit might be coming from in terms of their experience, right? And so there are some kids who are engaging in bullying behavior that aren't experiencing or receiving, that type of affirmation, that they really need to have their tank filled. And so if their environment tends to be more critical of poor things, but then it forgets to give praise for the positives that are going on in their life, then part of that discussion actually starts with, did you know that your body, that your mind, that who you are as a person is worthy of admiration, protection, and needs to be treated as something special, worthy, and free of assault. That can be a difficult thing to hear for a child who might not be experiencing it in that world. And again, I'm not saying that that's how all people engaging kind of bullying behavior begins, but often that can be one of the ways that we get there. And so starting that conversation there and having them feel that, right, is one of the ways to build that bridge of empathy. Because if they've not experienced that for themselves, it's hard to get in the mind of someone else to know how to extend that, so that you're helping someone else to kind of feel that or understand that. Other ways sometimes kids get there is, if they are maybe just inattentive and kind of, oblivious to their surroundings, and maybe they are just engaging in behavior that they think, oh, this is going to be funny, and people are going to recognize, that I'm using this sense of humor, even if it's at the expense of someone else's reputation or of their worldview, right? And so someone like that who's, really searching and kind of hungry for this positive affirmation, but are doing it in poor ways, then part of what, the conversation begins talking about, how do you get that? How do you get the positive that you're looking for without, damage? And then if kids are just intrinsically struggling with kind of a negative view of themselves, and so they see themselves that way, and that's the lens through which they see the world, then, working with someone in therapy, working with a pediatrician, trying to help them to better understand that will be crucial to helping them build a more positive selves that then they're able to give to the world.
Wow. It's very insightful and very helpful. This next question might even help some adults who are listening right now that might not have forgiven bullies of the past. How does forgiveness play into helping the bullied heal?
Sure. And sorry, I'm fixing my microphone, so I apologize for the
You're
jumble.
fine. You're fine. No, you're good. You've been a little bit in and out, but we've caught most of what you're saying. So
All right, good,
we're good. Yeah.
good. So in terms of forgiveness, and did I hear you right? So forgiveness from the parents' perspective, or even the kids' perspective?
From anybody. I mean,
Yeah.
you know what, I have given some advice to children who have been bullied along the lines of, you know, while they are hurting you and while they're angry, while you're angry about it, you harboring that anger is only going to make you sicker.
That's right.
It's not going to, you know, it's not going to do anything to them. And in fact, if you forgive them, if they are a hurt person, them seeing your maturity might flip their whole world on edge
Yes.
in a way.
Yes.
So
Yes. I love that advice, actually, and I think you're right on target. That resentment or the hurt that we hold on to actually just eats at our insides, you know. And so I've heard it described by a therapist that I trained under, that, you know, often the resentment that we hold is actually like, you know, drinking poison and hoping the other person gets sick. Right. It doesn't work that way. Right. We don't get to the healthy healing wholeness that we need for ourselves by holding on to it. And again, but it's totally understandable and it's natural. Right. It's natural that if someone, you know, hurts us, that we hold some of that, you know, in and against them, even if, you know, we've seen a renewal in their life, or they really are contrite and trying to express themselves, you know, that they recognize where they've gone wrong and they want to amend. And the same can be true for us parents. Now, forgiveness is not necessarily the same thing as, so there's an open channel and now, you know, you can come over whenever you want, or we give them space and time, unsupervised time for it to happen again. Right. And so I do want parents to hear, you know, okay, you can both extend that kind of, you know, gratitude for them showing remorse and not holding on to that resentment, but still have reasonable boundaries and until you've seen a habit of life and behavior that allow you to drop the walls and be able to trust a little bit more. But holding on to the hurt, holding on to the pain is not going to make your child better, is not going to make you better either. And so, and I think that's just a helpful lesson for our kids, that, you know, that those who are coming against us are often kind of struggling in their way, often in ways that we'll never fully understand. But you know, the best that we can do is try to love them. Sometimes in loving them, that means setting an appropriate boundary and allowing them to heal and do what they need to do. But not to allow that to steal our joy.
yes. Forgiveness is not carte blanche to continue to walk all over us and hurt us further, but it will help us. It will help us to not, as you said, you know, keep drinking poison that only hurts us more. So
right.
You are so busy. You're helping so many families, but you do have time, or you do make time to create content, which is very helpful. Where should everybody watching follow you to continue to learn from your wisdom and tips?
Thanks so much for saying that. So anywhere you can search at Dr. Mitnaul, I can essentially be found there. So I think my biggest presence is probably on between TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And it varies by content. So YouTube, I tend to have more longer form kind of explanations and maybe citations to, you know, to really good resources or articles. But Instagram and TikTok, of course, are, because they're more video kind of focused, they're kind of short tidbits. And so if parents are looking for additional advice, guidance, or support, or and often if I'm doing a webinar or something like that on a particular issue, that's where people can kind of take a deeper dive, you know, and hopefully get some helpful tips to help them in their journey in parenting in the age of screens. Because this is just as you were saying, this is a totally different game than even our parents had to experience. So yeah.
Absolutely right. We'll make sure to drop links to follow you in all the places in the comments below. As we close, is there anything that we haven't yet covered that you'd really like to impart to everybody who will see this, just around bullying, cyberbullying, mental health and wellness, et cetera?
Sure. I think maybe one of the last things I'd say about that is, especially as when it comes to kids who have experienced bullying, that one of the things kiddos can feel, especially if they fall in that camp of sometimes being a little bit more self-conscious than we want them to be, or socially anxious, is to also affirm for them that you haven't done anything wrong. Right? That you haven't invited this, on yourself, that this isn't something, a defect or a flaw in you. It is the other person who is struggling. And so I think that can be one of the unspoken hurts that sometimes kids are feeling. And so as part of that conversation, that if parents can be sensitive to that, and maybe even ask directly, because asking doesn't put the thought in your child's mind. It may just give them permission to be able to share it with you. So making sure that they're not carrying or wearing unduly the burden of what they've been experiencing, and blaming themselves.
Wow. 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 Very powerful insights. I'm so thankful for your time. I'd be remiss if I didn't remind everybody watching. I mean, if you're watching this, clearly you have heard of Bark, but in case you don't know, Bark can alert you if your child is being bullied, is the bully, is even witness to bullying happening. The amount of bullying alerts that we send daily is staggering. And, just to really bring it home, our tech has helped to save lives. We have sent alerts to parents who did not know that their child was in imminent danger. They were looking to, in their life, and thankfully a Bark alert helped to save their life. And so it's really heartbreaking when you hear from parents who say, I wish I would have known, or I didn't know. And it's because sometimes it just lives deep in their digital signal. So if you don't have Bark and you'd like to try it, I highly recommend it.
Yes.
Please follow Dr. Mitnaul in all the places. Thank you for watching. Leave a comment, ask us questions, let us know what you think, share far and wide. And until next time, I can't wait. And thank you.
Thank you, Titania. I'm so grateful for the work that you do for Bark. I really do think it's probably one of the most important things we can be doing for our children in this day and age, is actually being vigilant about their presence there. And so I so believe in the mission. And so if people have not checked out Bark yet, they really need to do themselves a service and being sure that their kids are looked after. Yeah. So
you heard him. Do what the doctor says. All right. Well, you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. You too.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.